Thanks for being here.
So, Kirk, we've been doing a series of shows on the FBI hack of the San Bernardino's shooters' Apple iPhones. And we had some proprietary information about a month ago that the FBI had hired an Israeli firm,
Celebrate, I think. Yeah,
Celebrate, to hack the phone. We actually found we did a Freedom of Information request and actually got the invoice by which Celebrate was paid. Do you have any information on that hack? And then we'll take the show from there.
Well, let me say. Unfortunately, I don't have any insider information, but I do have general observations about the whole matter. And they're as follows. I really don't know if Celebrate broke the code, Apple's code, or not. But I would say this. Others have opined that the government's pushing this to set a precedent so they can get into any phone it wants to, no matter where encryption goes into the future. And I believe that is true. But I don't think they really needed to break the encryption either. And here's why I say that. That phone did not function in isolation. In other words, if there's something terribly valuable on the phone, it is only valuable in that phone called other phones. Now, when that happens, the metadata or the phone numbers are not encrypted. If they were, the telephone system wouldn't work for that phone. It wouldn't be able to put a call out over the network. The point being that whatever information was phoned to other people, otherwise why would it be on that phone, is available on those other phone numbers. We know that the NSA and others have available to them through various methods and authorizations metadata for telephone calls. And in fact, the recent legislation affecting the Patriot Act and the collection of metadata actually expanded NSA authorities and access to, namely, cell phones. So what I'm suggesting is that NSA didn't have a problem with that phone. The government didn't have a problem with that phone. It called other people, and those other people are known. So you can go get those phones, or the collection you already made on those phones sitting in Bluffdale or some other location. So it's a red herring, much to do about nothing, important to us as users who want privacy. But it's all a sham.
So,
either way, and whether Celebrate helped them or not is not really that important.
So yeah, it does seem like there's lots of ways that they could get that information first, from the other phones, the metadata that's collected. So does it seem like the FBI is trying to? I mean, they're basically pretending that they have no access to that to make people feel like they can go ahead and talk about whatever they want to on their phones again? Is that part of the deal?
Well, they want to shame Apple through public pressure because, you see, there is no constitutional requirement on any private entity, business, to do work for the government outside of a contract. You can't say, I want what's on that phone to Apple and get it if you're the government. That's not in the Constitution. You cannot indenture people to do work that you don't duly compensate for. Could it reach a deal with Apple and outside of court and say, hey, I just want to hire you to do this? Now, Apple can say, I don't want to do it. That's not in my business interest. I want to supply my customer base with private communications, and you're jeopardizing my future business. Right. And so it doesn't have to have a contract with the government, and the government doesn't like it when you say no.
So do you think that, as far as how they got in there, do you think they just, they copied the basically copied the data, the way it's set up, and tried it by using what they could gather from other collected sources to try to figure out what the password was, and then so they didn't have to worry about it.
That's possible, John. Or it's entirely possible they never got into the phone.
Interesting.
And they're trying to make a legal case that this is a big deal. How are we going to protect Americans? Which, again, to me is a red herring.
Kirk, this is John again. You just was speaking to my partner here, my wingman, an IT expert, actually. I'm so lucky I have Sid Cooperrider as my guest, as my regular co-host. Is the FBI under any obligation to tell Apple how it unlocked the iPhone 5C?
No.
Okay. All right.
No, it does not.
No legal obligation, but perhaps there's other reasons why they should tell Apple about that.
Yes, they should, but they won't. It's not in their own interest. The world's changed. Our culture in this country's changed. We once followed the law, used to be. We had each other's interests in mind. There's nothing new here. I mean, people have been using encryption for years, and the FBI never had a carte blanche right to access it. Governments use encryption. The Soviet Union used encryption widely on its communications. And it's a fact of life, and you need to know how to deal with it and learn how to deal with it, and realize anyway that content is rarely more important than metadata. And if you can't monitor targets successfully from metadata, you have no business being in the intel business.
Right. Kirk, this is John again. As you know, the White House leads up a multi-agency team called the Vulnerabilities Equities Process.
Right.
And they consider the risk and rewards of keeping security flaws secret. We've filed a couple of Freedom of Information requests on that as well. The Vulnerabilities Equities Process team weighs on whether the government could get that information in some other way and how likely it is that someone else will discover the same vulnerability. Could you talk a little bit about the Vulnerabilities Equity Process and the team? Very little reporting has been done by mainstream media on that facet of national security.
I can only tell you, John, that I would be highly skeptical of anything calling itself an equities team designed to assist business in this day and age.
Yeah.
It's cutthroat. It's become cutthroat. The government has no regard for law and order anymore.
Right.
They want advantage of all access to all information all the time.
Right.
It is clear that's what the government wants. Former director of NSA, Keith Alexander, said it on one of the Snowden view graphs. I call them Snowden view graphs. They were really created by Alexander and the government. But on the one from a briefing at Harrogate, England, it said, in quote, all the data, all the time. That's all you need to know. They want access, and they won't take no. So they'll use any method, even under the guise of being a friendly entity, that if you give them access to your communications, they will inform you of weaknesses. Unfortunately, winks and nods and handshakes don't get it anymore.
Right. Exactly. So we have a few. I don't want to say we've recruited a few sources of our own. That'll make me sound like an enemy agent. but we've recruited a few potential whistleblowers of our own that keep us occupied here at KMEC Radio. And they say that, in fact, I just received a couple of emails. They say, number one, there is a White House cybersecurity coordinator. Can you confirm that?
Gee, if there is, would I be surprised? No, but I didn't know officially that there was one.
Okay, we'll follow up with a couple of our... by the way, Bill Binney was a guest on the show 2 weeks ago.
Great.
So we're going to be following up on this like a dog with a bone.
Like a dog.
Yep. Or just like a dog.
Absolutely.
A couple of junk house dogs here. Junkyard dogs. So the other thing that some of our sources are telling us, and in emails, real-time emails right now, that there are times when this mythical or not cybersecurity coordinator at the White House decides whether more people would be harmed by an unfixed security issue than helped by the government covertly using the loophole as part of an investigation. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that is probably part of the assessment that's made. But do I think there is someone, a benevolent soul in the White House looking out for you and me? No.
Okay.
I don't believe that.
And the final question, this source, who's active duty right now, is asking us to ask you is, this person claims that there are secret White House led procedures or White House drafted procedures that govern whether companies get notified of potential flaws. Is that anything you know anything about?
No, I don't know it, but again, I would not be surprised. There's a political angle to everything, including mass surveillance and cybersecurity. They're sort of mirrors of each other.
Right.
But have much more in common than difference. They overlap by about 75%. And but one's defend, one is attack, and the other one is read. There are three aspects to it. But the point of it is, it probably goes into some algorithm in the political thinking, but everything out of, especially this White House, but I would also say the one past, and in recent times has become so political rather than mission focused.
Right.
It's just changed the whole way we interpret truth coming out of the government.
Right. If you could describe that algorithm, how would you describe it?
Well, what it should be, John, is any time the government is paid by taxpayers to do a job to ensure the security of the nation, we should expect nothing short of truth. Not spin, not reinterpreted, but truth. Now, I understand the need to keep classified information classified, but we're now in an era where we have whistleblowers out of the DOD, a group of them, saying the government, meaning the DOD, the intel community, is changing intelligence to fit political ends.
Right.
Now, once that starts, whatever is it that you can believe out of any of them?
Right. And
They've hijacked the system and polluted it. It's like taking a drop of sewage and putting it into a clean glass of water and saying, well, it's only a little dirty. You can drink it.
And how does that get fixed, Kirk?
Now you've asked the question of the ages. Yeah. I was just this past week at a River Run Film Festival down in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where the latest film about our whistleblowing efforts, largely focused on Bill Binney, a good American, is being shown. And I had a question and answer afterwards, and each of three showings, three different audiences, asked that same question: what can we do? And here's where it gets tough. We have to become demanding instead of nice. We're all too nice. We rarely pick up the phone and call a congressman or a senator. I would say call your congressman, demand this cease. Now, what you're going to hear is, we don't have enough votes in Congress to shut up the president or change what it is he's doing, or the evil that's being done, because there's so many involved in it. So, and there's a certain amount of truth to that, but I do think the only way we're going to get it fixed is through clamor, volume, activity like never before. If we need to march on Washington, we're going to have to do that. But at least as a first step, scream at your senator or your congressman. And if you really want to cause a din in at least one senator's ear, it ought to be Senator Burr of North Carolina, because he is the chairman of the Senate Select Subcommittee on Intelligence.
Right.
And inundating his office in particular with phone calls. Burr's been around intelligence for the last 15 years. It was he who Diane Rourke, Bill Binney, I, and Ed Loomis told about NSA turning its resources against the American people, and that was in late 2001 when he was a congressman. He did nothing. But we were four people attempting to blow the whistle. We need tens of thousands to make that phone call and inundate his staff with phone calls demanding that this stop.
Well, we have the good fortune of having two top players in the congressional intelligence community in our backyard here at KMEC Radio. We have Senator Dianne Feinstein, of course,
who's the vice chair of that.
Is the vice chair of that, and the former chair, I may add, and who also recommended one of my sons give him a congressional nomination to one of the federal military academies. And Representative Mike Thompson, who gave another one of my sons a nomination, a congressional nomination.
And by the way, for you listeners, their phone number is 202
Yeah, go.
224-1700.
Repeat it, please.
That's 202-224-1700.
So my point is, Kirk, we have pretty good relationships with both Senator Feinstein and Representative Thompson. I personally as well, since my sons have gone through their congressional nomination process. Mike Thompson was the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee and chaired the subcommittee on counterintelligence, terrorism, human intelligence, and intelligence evaluation. And he's a real player in the intelligence community. He knows quite a bit. I'm actually kind of impressed that a grape grower and inventor would know so much, but he does. And one of the concerns that Congressman Thompson raised, Kirk, is that now that the FBI has demonstrated that the iPhone can be hacked, others will try. And he has described the iPhone as a tiny little Fort Knox that from the outside used to be very hard to get into, but now we know that's not the case. The San Bernardino hack by the FBI changes that whole game equation, and Congressman Thompson says that cyber criminals and amateur hackers now will come out of the woodwork to hack iPhones. Do you think this is a real fear by Congressman Thompson?
I wouldn't discount it totally, but I would discount it in a large part, and here's why. If I read correctly, the particular phone in question at San Bernardino, owned by the county, was not the latest iOS or model. Mm-hmm. That Apple made substantive technical changes subsequent to that particular model phone that are not as easy to break as that one. So it's not an immediate success. You can break versions, and then there's always new versions. And this nip and tuck game of I shut you out and someone trying to open the door is going to go on ad infinitum into the future. It's
right.
Part of the game. We did it with the Soviets as a nation. Every nation is trying to break into the other guy's knickers, and we just have to be better to produce a better defense. And that's going to continue, and that will keep the industry on its toes. I'm not.
Yeah, and to that point, Kirk, in a recent conversation I had with Senator Feinstein on exactly this point, this cat and mouse game, she points out there's an extensive underground online network in Eastern Europe where you can get anything for money. Other people stumble upon the same hacking techniques that were used to crack the San Bernardino iPhones, and cyber thieves and governments as well engage in a very vibrant marketplace
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk about that as well?
Well, other than I guess from my perspective, it's mundane in the sense that this has been going on for decades. This is nothing new. And it's the public that sees it as new because it now, rather than just affecting U.S. government communications, we have a public who's been sensitized to the Fourth Amendment and demands a certain amount of privacy in their lives. They have learned that their own government wants access to their communications, and they're troubled by that. So the whole environment's changed, and this is healthy, I think. I think Snowden would say it's healthy.
Right.
And I hope more companies get into the encryption business and help keep the user a step ahead of their government. And I'm going to say it again. Why do you have to read somebody's communications when 90% of the time it's a waste of time? Right. Unless you're trying to do something other than or more than simply secure the nation. Maybe you want to know people's political thinkings and leanings. Maybe you want to control the population. And maybe there's a whole list of things that those in power would like to do with information that you and I wouldn't dream of or shouldn't be dreaming of.
This is Sid here. I don't know. That sounds kind of like conspiracy theory crazy talk there.
I know.
Wait a minute. Well, you mean these private citizens have a right to have their private communications private?
Absolutely.
You think? But I thought it was only public officials that had their private communications private.
Well, they certainly act that way, don't they?
They certainly do.
So I had a question about this black market in Eastern Europe, where cyber thieves and governments and all kinds of other players, including corporations as well, engage in this, underground online network where bugs are bought and sold. Do you think that, do you think a big company like Apple, which has pretty good core values, I think, corporate values, and doesn't generally reward bug finders with cash, do you think that Apple could go to this black market and turn to the black market and pay these cyber thieves to find bugs in their own network?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, there must be hundreds of young people out there between the ages of 15 and 30 who would love the chance to make a nice dollar trying to probe Apple's encryption algorithms and methods. They're out there. You know they're out there. Mm-hmm. I know the IT community, so does Sid. There's plenty of people you could find that would just love to be paid to do that kind of work.
Yeah. Okay.
So Apple doesn't have a 0-day bug finder's fee?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
I really don't know.
I thought they did. I thought you were saying they didn't, John.
No, they don't.
They don't?
Not
okay.
that I know of. I mean,
okay.
I contacted Apple for this show.
Okay.
And I asked them, I said, do you go to these black markets and do you, pay cyber thieves to find bugs in your system, in your products, in your networks? And they said no.
Okay.
Well, it might be the way you phrased the question.
Yeah, I think
because
it
you
is
said
that way,
black markets. How about just say, do you go out and try to hire good people to get into your system?
Or do you pay people when they
how they
bring
answer
bugs?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that came into the discussion with Apple was into this very discussion was the whole experience. I'm trying to think of the name. There was an Italian company that bought and sold bugs. What was the name of that company? Do you remember, Kirk? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do, okay. But I can't remember it.
Yeah, so it happened last year. Where an Italian company that bought and sold bugs saw its entire database leaked onto the internet, and which was like catastrophic, and that security issue of having a company that specialized in buying and selling bugs having their entire database
hacking team.
That could explain why the FBI and are being so secretive about this whole.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. Sid, do you know anything about that Italian company?
No, I remember that. I didn't follow that too closely, but the other thing I'm wondering is, I think the new iPhones do have SIM cards, just like most other phones, I believe. And so if those, and probably I suspect that another way that those phones could have been broken into is because they already were, because the SIM cards were already hacked when they were put into the iPhones. And I think they're hiding that from us too.
Absolutely.
Sid, do you want to talk about that Dutch company and ask Kirk what he knows?
The Dutch one or the Gemalto?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Gemalto. Yeah, you know Gemalto?
Yeah, it's the one I read. I read the same article. I think it came out of the Snowden documents, but I'm not sure.
Well, we had Tom Drake on the show talking
about that. Tom Drake talked to us about it right after that happened. Interestingly, Gemalto's motto is "security to be free." I found that kind of funny. But yeah, that was the NSA GCHQ joint hack where they, then they just tried to pretend nothing happened. And so and if that came out, you got to wonder how many of them are already pre-hacked. I'm sure because, if they want all the data all the time, I'm sure that's, I'm sure that more of that has happened.
Yes.
Yep. Kirk, I know you're not an attorney.
Thank God.
Do you think that that Apple has grounds to sue the FBI for hacking the iPhone? After all, they did have a court hearing scheduled, I think, on March 29th, and the FBI beat them all to the punch and hacked the phone with this third party. And it seems to me that Apple would have some grounds for that. Are you hearing in the circles that you move in that might happen?
I think the government would win such a suit on the grounds that it needs to provide national security, and there's nothing in the Constitution that says the government can't attempt to break into encryption. Now, unless you can win it from a Fourth Amendment perspective, which is going to be tough because then you have to say, well, that Fourth Amendment only applies to users that are American citizens, and you might stretch that to whether they're in the U.S. or abroad. But it still leaves a whole lot of other people out, so I don't think that Apple would win that kind of a lawsuit.
What unanswered questions are there about the FBI's hack of the iPhones?
Well, it's just a smaller part of the larger effort by government, and I'm going to say the law enforcement and communities. Law enforcement's gotten lazy. It doesn't want to do old-fashioned investigative techniques that include talking to people, getting leads, knocking on doors, chasing down, looking for evidence to find probable cause to then serve somebody in a court of law. They don't want to do that anymore. They want all access to all the information, just like NSA is, and they're demanding it, and they are going way beyond anything that's constitutional, and we've got to stop it.
Good old-fashioned gumshoe work.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about the bigger picture as long as we have you on the phone, Kirk. And we talked to Bill Binney about this as well. This FBI hack of the iPhones is just a very, very small part of the picture. You and Bill were the first to disclose, more about Operation Stellar Wind, which followed the whole Trailblazer thin thread issue that you both came to prominence with, and then you've made these new disclosures. Why don't you tell our audience about Stellar Wind?
Well, essentially, Stellar Wind was, let me preface this as well. And I really haven't mentioned this before, but even before Stellar Wind, before Thin Thread, there had been discussions amongst managers at the agency about whether or not it may be more cost-effective and easier if the agency simply approached companies and bought their data holdings where those data holdings concerned knowledge about sectors or the whole population, for example, whether they be foreign or domestic. Normally, one would interpret efforts at NSA to be directed at foreign powers, foreign populations, because that's the job of NSA, producing foreign intelligence. Spying on Americans was prohibited, although the NSA has broken that rule for about 65% of its existence since it was founded in the late 40s. And by the way, a lot of people don't know that was executive order. It was a handwritten note by the president that produced NSA. It was no act of Congress. But the point of it is, it's supposed to be focused on foreign threats. Nothing to do with inside the NSA, but this is without permission and without full understanding of what NSA has meant. In other words, they've hidden behind techno-speak. Right. And Sid knows that it's pretty easy to snow job people who aren't schooled in the art of IT and data.
Oh, you mean like members of Congress?
Yes, exactly. And I've never understood to this day why Congress, if it was really intent on doing reasonably effective oversight, why the two committees, the two intelligence committees set up back in 75 as a cure for stopping NSA from ever again spying on Americans, why they have not acquired technical teams or one very good, very knowledgeable technical team of people to peer into NSA databases and NSA user actions to track the use of information that's acquired to see, A, is it being reported or not, or is it lying fallow in databases? In other words, how good are their tools that are designed to discover bad people? And are they misusing data in any way by sending out reports that they shouldn't be sending out, or spending time looking at things they're not supposed to look at? Of course, encryption within NSA, in my idea, I think Sid would agree, you don't invite your analysts to look at things they shouldn't. You encrypt it, and they don't get to see it. Right. But the point of it is, why hasn't the Congress armed itself with something that is truly a verification process that the NSA is on the up and up? It wouldn't be hard to do. There are a lot of IT people that would love that job just as much, as long as you empowered it and said, we're not going to spin your job and change the findings politically. We're going to let the truth speak. Why that hasn't happened probably tells you everything you need to know. Nobody wants the truth.
Well, I think that's something that we should demand when we call the Senate select. So that would be a great job. Yeah, I think we should demand that job or that group exists, and yeah, that's one way to start. But you're right. We do know why it's not there.
Yep.
And what you also could have pointed out, Kirk, is that this Operation Stellar Wind, well, two things actually. It has been almost completely useless.
Right.
We know that Charlie Savage of the New York Times filed a Freedom of Information lawsuit that he won. He prevailed over the NSA. And in a huge report, 747 pages,
mostly redacted.
It was demonstrated that it was largely useless. Number two, it was revealed that Operation Stellar Wind came into existence not as a result of any congressional action. It didn't even come into being as a result of an executive order per se.
That's right.
But Bush basically picking up the phone and telling the NSA was okay to start collecting email and phone metadata on American citizens.
Absolutely. And if Bill probably maybe already told you, Bill Binney, that it was simply taking an analytic tool that Bill had invented,
right,
and feeding it phone data and email data from companies rather than some source of intercept out on a fiber optic line somewhere.
Yep.
That was stellar wind.
That was stellar wind.
That's it. And they thought magical things would pop out. But why would you expect things like that if it's Americans? I mean, did someone really believe that we are a repository for stealthy terrorists in any number?
Right.
I am sure they're coming in, and we probably have cells, sleeper cells, by this late date in the ball game.
Right.
But the thing that was lacking was how you manipulate metadata. First of all, if these are records from phone companies, I don't know how close to real time they are. And the whole problem with NSA in recent years, as witnessed by lack of success, mainly, in stopping Boston Marathon bombing,
right,
stopping
right,
Brussels, stopping Paris, stopping Fort Hood from ever happening. That's the job of NSA. It's not to do forensic analysis after the fact, because you're allowing people to die. And that's the big difference from when I was there.
Yep.
We were always leaning forward to prevent attacks.
The incompetence is mind-boggling, Kirk. It's just mind-boggling. On the other station that I had a public affairs show on, KZYX, I actually published in my blog the very cable, the diplomatic cable that the Russians sent to our State Department warning us about these two knuckleheads that set off the bombs at the Boston Marathon. We were warned.
Absolutely.
We were warned. And somebody,
Yeah.
You must have a whole army of GS-14s, 15s, and 16s collecting, more than $100,000 a year plus federal pensions. That what? Just look at this stuff and say, oh, it's time for lunch?
Exactly, John. I mean, I know for a fact that if Bill Binney or I were there, that wouldn't have happened. We would have jumped on. I mean, you don't second-guess a tip-off, especially a formal one, even if it's someone that you don't feel quite easy about. It doesn't cost you anything to look.
Yeah, these guys had...
Sid, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yep. Sid's got a question.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say that, I've tried getting rewarded for my incompetence, and it usually doesn't happen.
That's exactly
well, you got
right.
this job.
Hey, look at General Hayden. If you want
We're working together. That's your reward.
If you want a stellar example of getting reward for failure, it's General Michael V. Hayden.
Oh, yeah. Go on, tell us.
He presided over the largest intelligence failure in the history of NSA, meaning 9/11 happened.
Right.
Then he proceeded to preside over the largest failure in acquiring new capabilities at the National Security Agency, spending billions of dollars, wasting billions on something called Trailblazer. Mm-hmm. That was nothing but view graphs in a presentation when Thin Thread was running, up and running and demonstrably producing intelligence. Yet they threw it out the window, went for a slide presentation, and failed 4.5, 5 years later.
Yeah. Today's biggest loser, Michael Hayden.
And then he gets promoted to be Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and then goes on to be named the Director of Central Intelligence. And now he sits at Chertoff Group making a 6 or 7 figure income comfortably, pontificating about all the goodness he did.
Yep, he's definitely the biggest loser for today. So when are we going to get to see A Good American?
That's a good question. It's making the rounds of festivals, and people can go to agoodamericans.org and see a list of the festival locations. I know today it's being shown in Washington, D.C., at a film festival. Last week it was shown 3 times in North Carolina, Winston-Salem, where I was. And before that, Sweden, and it has other locations in a listing that people can look at and see. Now, beyond that, I am learning that the film business is about finding somebody who wants to sponsor the film, buy it, if you will, and that the exposure happens at these film festivals. So if you ask me, will this go to TV? I won't know that until somebody picks it up, and then in a particular sector of the media, and we'll know then where it comes out for general release. Will it be part of a TV series, documentary? I just don't know yet. But people can watch that status. I'm sure Fritz Mosier, the Austrian producer, will announce that once that happens.
Who produced the movie, and where'd you get your financing from?
Yeah, it's Fritz Mosier, Friedrich Mosier, M-O-S-E-R, an Austrian film producer. He's been active for years in producing documentaries. He's not into fiction and all of that. He's a documentary guy. He's a historian. He loves history. He's absolutely dedicated to help us get this story out, which he believes has so many ramifications for how our societies evolve in Europe and North America, South America, the world, the civilized world, if you will, because the attempted takeover of our private lives by governments is absolutely unnerving and probably the biggest threat we all face, even larger than Al Qaeda or ISIS.
So after leaving NSA, you and Bill Binney formed Entity Mapping, LLC.
Correct.
And you were going to market that to government agencies. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was, what became of it, and what's happening with that, if anything?
Sure. We wanted to market something called the Entity Mapping Analyst Business Process, EMAP, which is copyrighted with the Library of Congress. If you go under EMABP, you will see our somewhat informal architectural drawings, it's functional drawings of EMAP, from data in to output of product. And we saw it as the ultimate big data solution for government, law enforcement, intelligence, you name it. It even could have been applied to the Genome Project. It could be applied to the effort to map the brain. It could be applied to detecting Medicaid, Medicare fraud. So it has multiple applications because all you're doing is feeding it different kinds of data. And so it's a big data processing business process, if you will. And we decided to take that, tried to take it to other parts of the government because NSA obviously threw it out the window and really never even heard what I just told you. Mm-hmm. If you read General Hayden's book, Chapter 2, it's about us. And he thought the whole argument was between Thin Thread and what they wanted to do with Trailblazer. He never knew what he was talking about. He never knew what we knew how to do, which was really EMAP. And we were never allowed to realize EMAP. Thin Thread was just one small part of putting various kinds of data sources together to feed the business process we called EMAP. And so it was an enterprise solution, and we helped NSA define a 10-year plan to build it. And Hayden threw that plan out. So he didn't even know what he threw out because he personally wasn't engaged. He simply let business take over, and business is going to sell what it wants to sell because it doesn't know anything about an EMAP. So when you throw money at companies, they're great, but they have to have direction. And had we done it and we were managing it, we would have said, here's what you're going to build. It's going to take 10 years to get there, but by 2012, we, the government, will be on top of big data in spades, and will be successfully stopping things from bad guys from killing people, crime, whatever it is you want to stop. But we knew it was dangerous if it ever got into the wrong hands, so Bill and I never wrote the particulars down. The closest we ever came was this diagram out in the Library of Congress that we copyrighted in 2004 timeframe. So anyway, we went to a company called Boeing. You may have heard of them. We were put against some government data that was sensitive, as you can imagine. We solved the puzzle, and where another agency said there was no intelligence, there was tons of it. And when the government found out about it, they told Boeing to shut the contract down because we were going to embarrass people. We had discovered things other people had not seen or could not see. So we packed up our stuff, left. They wiped the computer drives clean, and we went to Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, where we made another huge discovery. And in 2006, July, our contract was terminated. Why? Because we were embarrassing other large organizations in the government who already had contracts spending big money trying to do the same thing. We were upsetting the apple cart, and you can't do that and survive.
So what kind of safeguards for privacy were envisioned, or did you already have?
Oh, yeah. We knew how to handle privacy. Well, the beautiful thing about EMAP as a business process, one of the technical aspects, when you form nodes in a global set of relationships, and really you have to think of nodes as a round object, and then you have skinny lines running out to other objects. Think of them as people or corporations, whatever objects are. They can be people, places, or things. But you can represent the world and its relationship to other persons, places, things in the world. And you do it with dots and connecting lines. And when you do that and connect all the devices in the world, especially communications, you can begin, and transactions, by the way, not just communications, things like bank card transactions, gas card transactions, easy pass, passive transponder transactions when you get onto a tollway and get off. You begin to build and realize a capacity to track the world. Now, you really don't have the interest in literally paying attention to all of that, because not everybody in the world is doing anything wrong. But what you've got to learn to do, and you do it partially through tip-offs and partially through pattern recognition, isolate those nodes and connectors that look like or are connected to bad guys doing something wrong. And you will have, we envisioned instant, let's say near real-time capacity to become aware of such movements and activities, and therefore be able to tip off the right authorities in any country or our own authorities, our own military, in order to stop something from happening.
So you just started with Dick Cheney, right, at the center, and you just followed whatever he was connected to?
Well, now, you say that in jest, maybe not, but I want to tell you that Bill Binney got onto a pattern of data usage that was really attributable to our own government, and it wasn't for the wrong reasons. But when the government authority heard what we had detected they were doing, they were absolutely aghast that we had seen a pattern that pointed to a certain agency that was involved in a certain type of communications activity. And when we brought this to their attention, they were honestly worried. So it's not inconceivable that they didn't want us to succeed because we were so good into seeing patterns in data that we were also going to see what our own government was up to.
That's a really good point, Kirk.
That's a possibility that I've not dismissed.
Yeah. So I want to give another plug for our friend Kirk Wiebe and this excellent movie, A Good American. You know, someday they're going to make a sequel to this movie called A Real American Hero, and it's going to be about some of our favorite people who have been guests on this show: you, Bill Binney, Tom Drake, Colleen Rowley, Ray McGovern, Russ Tice. Very forgotten guy in this whole thing, Russ Tice.
He is. We just saw Russ a couple of weeks ago, in fact.
And very devastated. I think he was unemployable for the longest time.
You know, if you are a true American and you find yourself with a gun aimed at you, so to speak, or in Bill's case, he had a gun aimed at him by the FBI when he was in that shower when they raided all of us. We were tricked in the worst scheme of trickery ever invented by man.
It's diabolical.
It is.
I rarely use the word evil, but there's something about this where you have Americans very capable, technically capable, trying to do their best as patriots who are busted for it, basically.
Yes.
It's just incomprehensible. I want to plug the movie again. Kirk Wiebe just came back from the River Run International Film Festival in Winston-Salem, where he handled the question and answer for the movie. I think now the road show for the movie takes them to, I want to say where are we going? I know Bill Binney is next, isn't he, on the road show for this movie?
Yeah, we're kind of sharing as being spokesman for the movie, and all of us do appear in the movie. Now the central focus is Bill Binney. They couldn't feature all of us full time and do it in 100 minutes, so it's really built around Bill Binney as representative of all of us, but we all do appear in it in supporting roles.
Right, and one of the things that I saw on the Twitter feed for the movie was reaching out to Senator Bernie Sanders and some of the other candidates that they should see the movie. Have you heard from any of the presidential candidates?
Not that I'm aware of, but it's possible that we have, and just Fritz hasn't told us or something like that.
Who's managing the Twitter feed? Is it Fritz?
Fritz is, yes.
Okay. And the other thing I saw on the Twitter feed, I'm part of the Twitter feed, just my co-host here is wondering, how do you know all these things? is that somebody wrote that the movie is the best argument for releasing the 28 redacted pages of the 9/11 report. What do you think?
Well, it might be, but the movie's more about Bill as a person, a set of skills, and how we had a solution that would have put the U.S. government in a much better place at saving lives than where it is today. So we try to make the point that people are dying because of stupidity, arrogance, and so forth. You know, we've testified to 3 or 4 nations' parliaments in Europe. We haven't even been invited to talk to a congressman in the United States.
Wow. Well, we'll see if we can change that. Sid, I'm going to ask you to post a plug for the movie A Good American on our KMEC website.
Will do.
We'll do that probably within the hour. Kirk, you've got the floor. One of the things I wanted to mention, don't feel bad about your movie not getting the initial buzz that you wanted. We've spoken to Oliver Stone. I've spoken to Oliver Stone about the untold history of the United States. And, Showtime picked that up, but they did not promote it. And you could actually go to individual episodes of Oliver Stone's very excellent Untold History of the United States, and some of the, and it's all factual. None of this is opinion. It's all factual. How the United States never had to bomb Hiroshima, but we did it to demonstrate to the Soviets that we were badass, and they shouldn't mess with us after the war. Japanese were ready to give up. My father, who is a World War II vet and also with the Army of Occupation in Japan, could pretty much tell you that as well.
Sure.
He guarded the Japanese war criminals, including Tojo, at Tsugomo Prison during the Japanese War Crimes Tribunal. But it's a fabulous series by Oliver Stone. You can go to YouTube, Kirk, and for individual episodes and not see more than 10 or 20,000 hits on individual episodes. It's amazing. And yet, you have some cat doing somersaults, and that'll have 1 million hits on YouTube. So
you're right.
So it's all a matter of perspective.
Amen.